got
Hey guys, this is Brandon with Team Bad Decisions, and I'm here with another lore linguist for Friday, June 5th. We'll be looking at essentially today kind of Aeldari, Drukhari, Ynnari, the Space Elves, and what happened to them in the end of 7th edition, beginning of 8th edition, how they got there, what that meant for 8th edition, and how the current 8th edition, as it's wrapping up, affected that, and how it affected the lore of the universe as a whole, and kind of a speculatory look into what they could be going to, or where they may be going in the future, and where we kind of pull these nuggets of information from. Another thing, too, kind of a bonus today, is we'll be looking at Adepticon 2020. I got this in the mail this morning, which is the box. I hastily started to open it, but then realized that it'd be cool to share it with you guys. So if you're not familiar with Adepticon, it is a Chicago-based mini wargaming, miniature gaming, artistic, hobby, competitive, everything's there. It's like the mecca of miniature wargaming in the Chicago or even multi-state area in northern US. So it wasn't able to go on this year because of, obvious reasons, COVID-19 and stuff, but they did send out the packages that you would have gotten if you did go there. Just remove some of the tape, and then we're gonna look at kind of like what you'd get at Adepticon. I did order the premium package. It's a little bit extra money, comes with a little bit of extra swag too. So this is kind of what you'd get if you were there and got the premium package. Nicely packed. Every year it comes with coasters. So these are the Adepticon 18. It came with 2 of these Adepticon 18 coasters. Just like a little collectible item that you'd have sitting around if you go to a lot of different Adepticons. You'll get multiples of them. Warcaster had a free Warcaster mini. Looks like Black Bella out of the Warcaster series. It's a pewter mini. I don't play Warcaster games, and it looks like it's available on Kickstarter. But the model looks nice. It looks like a beautiful sculpt. Pewter's a little hard for me. I'm not great at pewter modeling, but it's a model. An Adepticon sticker with the Adepticon logo. some bases. I love these swag bags, even if only for the bases. It comes with a little baggie of pre-terrained bases from looks like ELRIK's hobbies, so Alurk's hobbies, wargaming products. The bases look to be high quality plastic. It has some like legally distinct space stuff kind of floating on the bases, and some it's kind of like a flocking finish, so you just have to paint it and it would look like regular ground. Looks to be a poster in here. Yeah, it looks like a Imperium poster. Has some custodes, some Imperial iconography, Imperial fists, some Imperial guardsmen, and they look to be I mean, obviously, if it's Imperial fists, they're defending some sort of bastion from attack. It'd be interesting because Adepticon 2 this year, I'm not sure exactly what they would have announced then, but they have announced 9th edition since then. So maybe Adepticon would have been a large enough event that they would have announced 9th edition there. And that could have been a herald of 9th edition, I don't know, some fluff. Also, I've noticed when I've gone with friends or multiple people that these gift boxes are not identical. So this is just an example of some stuff you may find, but you may get different. Like, this is a warband from God Tier. It's the Rangosh, Scourge of the Broken Plains, and Red Bandits. Again, it's not a game I play currently, but now that I have a warband for it, I might as well try it, you know? And in other games, they're from steamforge.com. And in other boxes, you may find a similar God Tier game, but they may give out different warbands to different people. Like last year, it was big on kind of that Age of Sigmar tile-based game that happens with warbands, Shadowspire. Yeah, I think it's Shadowspire. But they handed out different warbands, and it was kind of random which one you got in your package. We got Battlefront Fate of a Nation. Looks like a rulebook. It's, I don't know, well bound. It's got the rules for the miniatures of the game, some missions. And even though it's a game that I don't necessarily play, maybe I could use the missions to spark some interest in 40k missions I'm writing for a tournament, or maybe I can look at their model line for stuff to convert for games that I do play. A water-soluble golden yellow from MSP Bones paint series. It's kind of bright, but it's in a dropper bottle, which I highly recommend. Awesome. You can never have too many paint colors. This is not a test miniature. Again, a pewter miniature. They're in like a Fallout style game, miniature game. Looks like they is a human. But yeah, one of the humans from This Is Not a Test line. Some more stickers from Pop Goes the Monkey, Custom Bits and Pieces, the Wargaming Company, Penguin Empires. Here's some more stuff floating around. Metal Nico Games has a little miniature, pewter miniature in there. Then Adepticon 2020, the Metal Limited Edition Inquisitor Sister Joan. That model came out of this set as well. A beautiful little Inquisitor model. Definitely has rules in 40k. I don't necessarily play Guard, but as if some of my friends play guard, they could trade or used for conversion fodder. Keyforge, one of the Keyforge decks. I was interested in getting into Keyforge, so it's nice to get a little pre-made deck for you, but I haven't gotten anything yet. Marvel Crisis Protocol, the Hulk miniature. A Adepticon collector's pin. And then it looks like there's, of the Warhammer 40k adventure series, Attack of the Necron. So this is interesting because that Necron versus Primaris, this book would have been printed and made for the Adepticon game, like a Adepticon event, but with this whole Necron versus Space Marine, that's also the release of 9th edition, like the starter box. So there's a little bit in here, at least from the GW side of things, that makes me think that they were planning, at least hinting at the 9th edition release, or hinting at some sort of Necron Space Marine play at Adepticon itself. There's a USS Lincoln by Scott Perry novel. And looks last but not least a Outbreak Skirmish rulebook. So skirmish-based rulebook game about the zombie apocalypse. All of which seem really cool. So like, even if just for the basics of this game, or the basics of the box, they hand out a couple miniatures, a couple rulebooks. All are meant to get you into going to one of their booths, maybe spending some money, because ultimately these are all companies. They all, exist by you guys spending money there. And by handing out the rulebook, they hope you go and buy some models to play. Or by handing out a couple models, they hope you go and look at the rulebook, figure out if you're interested in some of it, and maybe going and testing the waters. But that was the Adepticon unboxing. I'm looking forward to next year for Adepticon, but we'll get into kind of like the meat and potatoes of the lore episode, or lore linguists. Let me flip this around because it's no longer the unboxing. Got the lore linguists. So we're going to talk about space elves. So the Aeldari Craftworld elves, the Drukhari dark elves, or the Dark Ones as they're called in some of the fiction, and then the Ynnari, which are the newest facet of the elves. But in order to get a good representation of what's going on now, we do have to look back in time to the start of the Warhammer 40k universe and follow kind of the storyline of the elves, or the fall of the elves. So when you go back to the creation of the Aeldari, they were all created one. So all the races of the elves were just created as the Eldar. And they were created by the Old Ones, another race of reptilian, psychically advanced beings, to fight the Necrons. Now, they were created psychically advanced, and so much so psychically advanced that it is even said in stories that they had machines in which they could hook up Eldar to them and then will things into being by just thinking about it. And the Old Ones, when they made the Eldar, had a failsafe, and that was that they made the Eldar immortal in the way that an Eldar soul, unlike the human soul, goes originally to the warp, and then the Eldar is reborn from the warp in a new body, or at least was from the beginning. So the Eldar had really no reason, as they developed, to develop technology in the way that humans were developing technology. And they also had no reason to reproduce, because when they died, they came back, and that was it. So they had millions of years of war with the Necrons, eventually defeating them and putting the Necrons into hiding in their tomb worlds, and living free-spirited and essentially immortal, where they lived out their age, they fought, whatever happened with them, they died, they came back. And this led to kind of a worshipping of not death, but like the joys of life. It becomes a very hedonistic society, and this starts forming some breaks. So the elves are still one group at this point in time. This is before the fall of the Eldar, and there begins to be a group of people in the Eldar community, and this is around the time that human beings are just starting to be a blip on the radar. So humanity is just starting to come to fruition. The elves have, kind of like the Roman society, been huge and expansive, and then they started to kind of stagnate and become hedonistic, and then they're just at the edge of starting to crumble. So there's a race of elves called the Exodites, which are kind of like the doomsday preppers of the elvish community. And these Exodites, they kind of see where the hedonistic ways, the psychic debauchery ways of the Eldar are going, and they piece out of there. They try to warn their brethren and the other elf races about what's potentially going on, and because they try and they fail, the other elf races are in no way want to listen to them. And the Exodites go, peace, I'm out. And they go to the edges of the galaxy where they could essentially live out their elven ways in one with the community and with the planets. And you may see, if you look up some Exodites, they're the Dino Rider elves, where they've kind of mixed their elven society with that of the planet that they're on. Hey, Laughing Jester, what's up, man? How's it going? We're talking about Eldar, Dark Eldar, Ynnari, kind of taking that from the beginning and into 9th. So we're just starting with the fall of the Eldar. They haven't broken into the different factions yet. So there's the Eldar and the Dark Eldar are still one faction. The Exodites have left at this point. And there's essentially, because they're so psychically attuned and they're so debaucherous and they've fallen into hedonism at this point, they created a chaos god in the warp. This is the birth of Slaanesh. So up until this point, Eldar souls are able to die. They go to the warp. They're immediately reborn. Yeah, I know. Not a lot of people aren't super into Eldar, but it's what I know the best about. So I like talking about it when I'm on shows by myself. And there's some cool information, I think, that we can pull from the Eldar lore that may influence where 9th edition is taking us, and we'll get to that. But in order to better understand that, I'm just trying to go by the older stuff and get us there, walking one step at a time. But the birth of Slaanesh, and that is written about in chaos codexes. It's written about in multiple stories, how the birth of the chaos god rippled throughout all of the chaos, the warp, the material plane, even the webway. And the webway is its own kind of interstellar pocket dimension in which the elves use and develop to travel between different areas on the material plane. So basically, it's kind of like Nightcrawler, if you're familiar with Nightcrawler, how he jumps into a pocket dimension in the Marvel Universe and then jumps out somewhere else. It's how he's able to teleport. The webway is kind of like that inner dimension. And that also is why there's not a lot of friction in the early development of the humanity versus the Eldar. Because while humans were going through the warp to get to where they needed to go, and they were just kind of branching out at this time, the Eldar just moved instantaneously from one planet to another using the webway. So there wasn't really a lot of friction. They didn't meet up a lot. And there isn't a whole lot of stories of early humans and early Eldars fighting or even meeting each other. But the Slaanesh being born put a huge stopper in the Eldar way of life, because she essentially sat in the warp and ate all of the Eldar souls when they died, so no elves were being reborn, ever. And this caused a huge fracture in the Elven society on what the hell they're going to do next. Because essentially you've lived millions and millions of years immortal. Every time you died, you just came back. So you just did what you wanted. Now that's no longer the case. When you die, you stay dead. A immortal society for millions of years suddenly and instantaneously becomes mortal due to their own hedonistic ways. So then it starts fracturing on what are we going to do about this. Well, the Eldar or the Aeldari side of that governmental body says that we're going to keep our psychic ways, but we're going to stop being debaucherous, and we're going to get off our planets, make these things called craft worlds, these giant spaceships that are the size of planets that they live on, and we're going to travel the stars in search of a way of stopping this, stopping Slaanesh. So they have like an internal fear of Slaanesh, but they also want a way of stopping that. Then they have the Dark Eldar, which thought they were the side of the Eldar that said, I'm not going to stop my debaucherous ways. I'll give up my psychic connection so that I can keep being debaucherous. I could feed off the hatred, the pain, the malice, the ecstasy of others, and I'm going to hide. So they essentially take their main big city of Kamarog, that's a planet-sized city, and they put it in a pocket dimension where Slaanesh hopefully doesn't find them. And this works for a little while. There's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of... We can touch on Dark Eldar society as a whole, but there's a lot of... They keep the debauchery, and they become these kind of like interdimensional space pirates, where they start in Kamarog in their own city, in their own pocket dimension. They jump out. They steal some slaves, some people. They kill. They hit an easy target. They take some people back into their pocket dimension to keep feeding their society of causing pain and feeding off that kind of the essence of emotion from people. And they do this kind of civilly. Like, there's not, both the Eldar and the Dark Eldar, when they fracture, there's not like a civil war. Some people think that they may have warred with each other, but the one thing that all elves shared is that fear that they once were immortal and suddenly are now mortal. When they die, their souls go to Slaanesh and they're tormented forever. And they don't want to cause another war or a civil war, killing off a bunch of each other and then feeding Slaanesh. So this goes all the way through most of 7th edition, in which Eldar develop a soul stone technology. So yes, the warp spiders move, traveling in and out of the warp, or not the warp, it's the webway, is the Eldar dimension that the warp spiders are jumping in and out of. It's also, the webway is the Harlequin. Some of their Harlequin moss exists in the webway, which is that. So if we're looking at Kamarog as its own pocket dimension, the webway is like a dimension in which, like in Stargate, it's the blue gooey stuff that connects the gates. It's the existence of the... But instead of just being a singular tunnel between two objects, it's an entire world that has no bearing on space or time. So you could walk into it, go 5 feet, walk out another gate, and you've gone millions of light years away. And it's just the development of the webway and the understanding of the webway is what allows different Eldar to jump in and jump out at different spots and not have to use the warp. Although Eldar, being so psychically attuned, are very cognizant of the warp, and the Chaos Demons are very cognizant of Eldar souls. But you're right, though. The warp spiders do use that dimension. They flicker in and out. So the Eldar use the Spirit Stone technology, and it's basically a stone, and you'll see it on a lot of the Eldar models, and there's a picture of it kind of like in the center of the screen up here, where they're multicolored stones. They exist in the warp and on planets that were sucked into the warp, so they're very hard to obtain. The Eldar actually use things called wraiths to obtain them, or constructs made and infused with energy of these spirit stones to go into that dimension, take these stones, and bring them back. Then once they're brought back, they're used to trap a soul. So they're used in the case that a soul leaves the body of an Eldar being, and then instead of going back into the warp, which it would normally do, and then Slaanesh just sits there and eats them up as they go into the warp, they go into the stone, they're trapped in the stone, and then another Eldar can take that stone, and there's soul nexuses that they develop in these giant spirit ships, these planetary ships, which is just an interwoven consciousness of souls at the core of the ship that they dump these spirit stones and these souls into, in hopes that one day that they'll defeat Slaanesh and these souls can be sent back into the warp to be reborn. But that day hasn't happened yet. The way that the Dark Eldar are trying to deal with this is that they go into one of the facets of the Dark Eldar city of Camarog is the homunculus covens, and this whole coven, or this whole facet of their society, is based on physical body modification and immortality through regeneration and physical immortality. There's a guy who's at the head of this one homunculus coven, the Flesh Prophets. His name is Vecht. He plays a very important role in some of this. So Vecht is very big in the Dark Eldar culture. He provides Kabalites and very wealthy Dark Eldar with regeneration properties. He will in turn take some of Eldar's soul and then say to them, okay, next time you die, I have you. I've got a piece of your soul, and I'm going to rebuild your body in these chambers. So he has these giant surgical suites in which he tortures people, and he builds new monstrosities and flesh crafts. And then there's all of these pods going up the chamber, and in these pods are hurt or mangled Dark Eldar beings that steal the essence and the screams and the terror and the visceral reactions from everything that's going on in the chamber, and slowly regrowing the bone and the sinew and regenerating the Dark Eldar that are in these regeneration pods above, based off the anguish and the hedonistic properties that are going on below. But Dark Eldar are also known for being very backstabby and very killy of each other, not very trusting. So Vecht is very paranoid that he is going to get killed, or that there's different archons, or essentially princes of the Dark Eldar city of Camarog, and that Vecht is going to die by the hands of one of these guys who wants his power and his status for himself. So Vecht makes a couple promises and a couple deals, and we're getting into kind of the mid to late 8th edition, or mid to late 7th edition stuff, beginning of 8th. So Vecht makes a couple deals, where he fakes his own death. He allows one of the archons that he knows, or they're working together. There's a bunch of princes working together, and witch cults and gladiatorial arena stuff. There's a bunch of them working together to try and kill Vect. So he plans them to succeed, or they think they succeed. They kill a body double of him. And the Harlequins plan a funeral because everyone thinks Vect is dead. So in the Dark Eldar literature, even the reader thinks that Vect is dead. It's not revealed yet that it's a sham. So there's a Harlequin funeral in Camarog, in the Pocket Dimension, where Harlequins are there. They invite all of the Archons and the witch cults and everybody who had anything to do with Vect's death. Now, not openly. No one openly knows who killed Vect at this point, but they strategically invite everyone that they think had anything to do with it. And then during the funeral, the middle of the funeral, which is held in the gladiatorial arena, Vect shows up. He comes right out of the center of the arena, and they release nerve toxin into the whole arena, and the Harlequins attack, and Vect calls in every single promise or every single IOU he ever has, and offs and calls in everybody to come and kill all the Archons, all the people that had anything to do with his death and demise. In one foul swoop, he kills a huge amount of Dark Eldar. Now, in that moment of death, in that gladiatorial game where Vect is just killing, he's got Harlequins on his side, he's got a witch cult on his side, he's got other Archons that were loyal to him on his side, and they are just slaughtering mass murder of the whole arena. The souls are actually, instead of being released into the warp where Slaanesh is eating them, they're coalescing, and Ynnari, the goddess of Eldar death, is born in the arena. So that's where the Ynnari are from. So there's a facet of Eldar which are now born in the very end of 7th edition, beginning of 8th edition, called the Ynnari. They are worshippers of the Eldar goddess of death, Ynnari. She has been silent up until this point, but now has a physical manifestation in Camarog. Now, this is big for a couple things. If we look back at the last time the Space Elves decided that they were just going to up and create a god, there was a huge rupture through real space and the warp and space-time. It was felt throughout humanity and throughout the galaxy. This, while in a pocket dimension, in Camarog, creating a god is still a huge event. And up until this point, there's been a gate. So there's different gates around Camarog, is how the space pirates jump out into real space and back in. But there's a gate to the warp called the Gate of Cain. Cain being the god of war, and for the Eldar. And years before this, almost as a prophecy of what's going to happen, Slaanesh has just been slowly and rhythmically knocking at this gate. Just pound, pound, pound. And the Dark Eldar have been fighting wars over who controls this gate, how many people should be stationed at this gate, backstabbing each other. But in that moment of explosion, you need creating a god of the Eldar, a good god. Now, good being in retrospect, it's the god of death. The gate breaks, and then essentially all hell breaks loose. Slaanesh and demons rush into Camarog, and they for a very long time, Camarog is assaulted by these demons through the breaking of the Gate of Cain. Now, Slaanesh herself comes through the Gate of Cain, but has better and bigger things to do. So she pieces out. She goes in to find Camarog, but then lets her minions and her demons do her bidding, and she goes. And it's actually in the novel, towards the end of the 7th edition, Gathering Storm, Fracture of Bealtan. And it's called Fracture of Bealtan because of what Slaanesh does afterwards. She goes to the Eldar planetary ship, essentially the world ship of the Bealtan, which is one of the races of Eldar at this point in time, and she kills it. She, as the Chaos God, she destroys the ship, fracturing the spirit nexus that we talked about that was in the center of the ship, fracturing that, devouring all the souls that came out of that, fracturing the ship, the everybody that was involved, and kind of paralleling this into what's going on in humanity at this time. There's a big chaos fight with humanity on there's an Imperial planet. I'm gonna get totally made fun of by my friends because I can't remember the name of it. Cadia, Fall of Cadia. So there's a huge war of Cadia going on during this time, and the Aeldari have a choice. There's these spirit seers, or people that can see parts of the future by looking into the warp, and they could either try and go help Bealtan and get them out of there, or they go help Cadia. And it's a huge choice for them, but they choose to go help Cadia. They go to Cadia and they grab some people that are there, some important people, and they pull them out before the Cadia explodes and they die. And this is important because this leads down to the alliance of Ynnari, the Ynnari Eldar, and Guilliman, the Primaris Marines, and how the Primaris Marines start building up. And this is the start of 8th edition. So you're looking at the Primaris Marines having relationships with the Chaos, or the Eldar God of Death, and the Harlequins, and they're building this rapport to try and stop Slaanesh. So that's kind of all going on right now. But then we jump back into Camarog, and it is days and days and days of solid fighting, and just them trying to hold off this onslaught and outpouring of demons into their only bastion, their only Dark Eldar home that's left. So what they end up doing is they can't close the gate. The gate is too hard. So if Camarog is in its little pocket dimension and it's floating in the center, what they do is where the gate is located on the offshoot or the side of the city, they cut it off the city, and they let the whole chunk just fall into the pit of despair. And that's kind of where it's been left off right now, is that Camarog is still under demonic incursion all the time, and they're still trying to fight it off, but they've sanctioned a part of the city that's now kind of sunk in and not attached anymore, where the demons have a foothold in their society. But there's hope, and even though the Dark Eldar, or the Drukhari, and the Aeldari, or the Craftworld Eldar, even the Exodites, they even fractured earlier on in this whole story. They see hope in Ynnari, the goddess of death. So finally, one of their Eldar gods has come to them to hopefully end their mortality, to make them immortal again. So this, ironically, being the goddess of death, they've really wanted the god of war, or Cain, to come help them, but that didn't happen. So they didn't get a warrior. They got this death goddess, and this incarn, or the avatar pictured here of the goddess of death, is actually in game as a model. You can play her. and her rules are kind of like her lore fluff, in which she gets more powerful if Eldar die near her. She she can consume the souls, kind of like Slanesh does, of the souls that are being sent into the warp. But instead of being sent into the warp to go to Slanesh, they're being sent into her, and she becomes more powerful. So she's kind of like a last ditch effort in she's hunting Slanesh, because if she can get to Slanesh and she could take the place of Slanesh in the warp, she can create that cycle again where Eldar souls can go to her instead of Slanesh, and then cycle back into the world and keep going, so on and so forth. But that also involves her, Ynni, the goddess, finding where Slanesh is, going into the warp, and killing her, which is a darn near impossible task, because like you're going into another dimension to find a being that has complete and utter control of that whole dimension, all of its reality, some of your reality. And so there's a big struggle even going into through 8th edition, this Ynnari and Ynni trying to find Slanesh as a goddess. But what is something that is unprecedented is throughout 8th edition, the Drukhari and the Aeldari and the Exodites don't have their own book, but there's some, they're kind of out doing their own thing right now, but they're coming together. They're working together again. There's no longer, I mean, there is some, there's always grim darkness in the universe. There's always an exception to every rule, but they're, for the most part, the Eldar and the Dark Eldar see hope in the Ynnari, and hope that not only can they one day be immortal again, but if by following and helping the Ynnari, they can expedite this process. And this involves more than just them now. In order to best fight Slanesh, sometimes they get thrown up against the followers of Slanesh, or even like the Chaos Space Marine followers of Slanesh, which by the terms of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that has pushed them to help gain the alliance of man. So they helped Gilliman come back from his stasis sleep. They may be, and this is kind of moving now in through 8th edition into the speculation of what could be going on lore-wise in 9th edition. They could be helping get other Primarchs back, other Loyalist Primarchs back, not only to help fight against the Chaos incursion that's going on right now, but in a kind of an Eldar, like, tricksy way, maybe forming a big enough distraction for the Chaos God Slanesh and the other Chaos Gods to lure her out in order to strike. Now, this is seen in a couple different places, and again, we're moving now into 9th edition speculation. So we'll draw on tips and topics that were brought up in earlier codexes, and in no way is this gospel or fact, but it is the best we have to go on for what may happen in the future. So there's an old Eldar space elf kind of like aspects. So there's these things called the Phoenix Warriors, and there is one for every aspect of the Eldar Craftworld house. There's a Phoenix Warrior, Bahamut, who's the winged swooping hawks leader, almost god-like figure, but there is a lore-based like kind of prophecy that when these Phoenix Lords were lost, kind of like the Primarchs, they were lost. And if they were ever to come back, they're going to come back in the darkest hour. And essentially the Armageddon, the prophecy is the Armageddon of the Eldar race. These Phoenix Lords are going to come back and save them, potentially. So as we're getting grimmer and darker in this world of grim darkness, we're edging closer and closer to the return of these Phoenix Lords. And with Necrons being the first big baddies to come out in 9th, and the Eldar being created to fight the Necrons, which are coming out in 9th, there's a good precedent that with the bringing back of the Silent King and the resurgence of the Necrons to fight the Space Marines. So the Eldar and Ynnari and Ynni bringing Guilliman back, and then using Guilliman, manipulating him, and putting him in a position where he's going to fight these Necrons so that the Eldar don't have to, is almost perfect for them. Because that allows them to focus not on their job that they were created for, which is to fight the Necrons, but on the Ynnari job of finding Slaanesh to fight her and to kill her. So we're moving on to the ninth edition prophecy of what may happen, and these Phoenix Lords coming back. There is precedent in it's not the newest Psychic Awakening book, but when the Psychic Awakening book that had Imperial Guardsmen, there is a transcript out of that book that reads that the Imperial Guardsmen, a platoon, the specific name of the platoon escapes me, but you could grab that book and read this yourself for the exact details. They find what they think is a modified warp spider suit of armor, and it is modified beyond what a normal warp spider would be. So it is immediately that tells me or speaks to me that they found the Phoenix armor, or the head warp spider Phoenix armor, and that immediately after finding this armor and cataloging it and trying to bring it back, they were assaulted by Eldar from they don't know where, just came out of nowhere. Many of them were killed. The armor was taken back into Eldar custody. So the Eldar now have at least one of their, or supposedly one of their Phoenix armors back. But they may have more. We don't know. They're kind of like the Primarchs, in which the lore about it gets a little hazy, gets a little clouded on like what happened to Russ. Did he went into the warp to go find something, and the Salamander's Primarch Vol, he's out doing something, trying to find some weapon somewhere. Like they get real vague. So it's kind of that same way with the Eldar and the Phoenix armor. But that could be essentially what a Primarch like model would be to the Imperium in 40k, like bringing back Guilliman, or bringing back Lionel Johnson, bringing back any of the Primarchs. Bringing back a Phoenix armor, or bringing back one of the Phoenix warriors, would be akin to that. And if we saw one of that come out in 9th, it'd be very well possible. They've already have precedent that could happen. Again, 9th edition too is opening up with a Necron insurgency, which means a couple things. It could mean there's rumored to be a Necron tomb world on Mars. So the Necron tomb world on Mars was led by the World Dragon, his kind of the pharaoh of that deep society, and Admech, Mars being their home planet, has known to kind of like leech a little bit of that technology out of the Necron society. So it could be them waking up, but if if it was them waking up, you may see more like out of the starter set, more like Admech versus Necrons, but also every starter set that's ever really come out has always been Space Marines versus some baddies. So it may still be the World Dragons, Mars, Necron Society, but just against Space Marines. It could also be a different Necron Society coming out, where Space Marines are fighting another Tomb World. I don't foresee. Oh, sorry, Laughing Jester. So it just came up. You'd have to look it up. Somewhere there was a war where the Orcs were fighting the Crimson Fists, and the Crimson Fists were calling out for help over and over. It was actually an Eldar force that came to help them to defeat the Orcs. Yes, the Eldar and the Orcs were created at the same time. When the Orcs were created, they're actually called the Kronks, and the Eldar are like the Orcs were made to train the Eldar. So when the old ones made them, the Orcs are essentially big, brutish fighting dummies, but they are mushrooms. They just spore and spawn, and the Eldar were immortal. They just, when they died, they came back from the warp immediately with a new fresh body, and they kept fighting, and they kept honing their skills against the Kronks or against the Orcs, and they got good at close combat fighting brutish warriors as these lithe Eldar. But now that they're mortal, they're scared shitless of the Orcs because they can die. They can't just like mess up. They go back to the warp, their soul comes back. But so they kind of avoid the Orcs to some extent. But you're right that the Crimson Fist, the Eldar and even the Dark Eldar are known to show up in kind of darkest hour situations, pop in, help out, pop out. And they're used in a literary device a lot in that way because they have the webway technology. They don't need a writer to have to figure out how an AdMech ship knew to be there and got weeks in advance notice and got there through the warp. Eldar can just be there as a literary device. It's great. They just pop in, they pop out. But also, they have the psychic connection through their seers to kind of to see the future and to see the possible outcomes, and they're manipulating fate in a way where they could sorry, I have an itchy lip. They're manipulating fate in a way to allow them to show up at the most opportune moment. They know that if they showed up earlier, that more of them would have died to fight because the Crimson Fists and them would have fought side by side, and they would have died along with the Crimson Fists. So they're kind of giant douches in that way. Well, they'll show up and they'll be like, oh, you already cleared out 50% of the Orcs. That's good. Now let's just slaughter the rest of them because this is the best moment for me to show up. So that's kind of is what it is. Now, even though that's douchey for the regular Eldar, the Dark Eldar are in some ways even more insidious, where there's Tau have been known to be fighting the Tyranids, or Hive Fleet Kraken to be exact, and they are just brutally getting fought. Yeah, exactly. Eldar are Doctor Strange, 100%. They've seen all 1 million like possible outcomes, and instead of giving you any information that would help you at all, they just peace out for a couple movies, and then they show up and give a thumbs up at the end like, you did it, good job. But the Dark Eldar show up to help out these Tau, and they basically tell them, well, we'll help you beat back Hive Fleet Kraken, we'll save your society, but what we want is a bunch of your warriors. And the Tau don't really want to do this. At first they're like, no, you're weird. We'll keep asking for help from other people. And then The Dark Eldar are fine with this. They go back in their little hidey hole and watch. And then they push the Tau back, or the Tyranids do, to the point of near extinction off that planet, High Fleet Kraken. And then the Dark Eldar come back and they say, "Are you ready to give us those bodies now?" And the Tau kind of have their hands tied, and they give in, and they give the Dark Eldar Tau warriors. And it said then that a couple days later, the Dark Eldar show up to completely beat the piss out of these Tyranids back with the Tau. And there's huge homunculus engines and flesh hulks and just destruction and tearing apart the Tyranids, which the Dark Eldar have been watching and studying and figuring out the weaknesses of the Tyranids. But it's also said that those flesh hulks, those giant bodies that were beating back the Tyranids, had Tau faces sewed onto them and were blue-skinned like the Tau are, basically showing that the Dark Eldar went in to help the Tau and used their own bodies and their own humanity and took the genetic material and the knowledge of their genetic structure and took all that information from them and then used their own bodies and their own like flesh crafted hulks to fight back and to save their own race, which is like if you think the Eldar are messed up in the way that they're going to show up like Doctor Strange and just kind of like help you in the last second but could have helped you before that, the Dark Eldar, they'll help you in the last second, but they're going to you're going to pay a much darker price for that help. And then, that brings us to 9th edition. Now, just the way that you could say that lore influences rules, we could also see that from the rules that they're hinting, it may influence the lore. Like, the 9th edition lore is probably already written. GW already knows the direction in which they want to go with a lot of this. We don't know yet. The books aren't written. But, yeah, it is heresy. It's super heresy. Well, yeah, kind of, but I see your point. But the lore's already written. But because of some of the lore, they wrote the rules of the game. And some of those rules are kind of have a basis in the lore and the fluff. So, you could look at, the rules that they're coming out with, and the ways that they're writing the missions and the ways that they're doing things in game and kind of infer maybe where the lore is going to go. So a couple big changes is that they're made changes to the size of the standard table that you play a mission on. They made changes to the size of the game. Now, the changing the size of the game has just as much to do with how fast they want a game to go and as much as it does with the lore of it. But with this, they are releasing a lot of close combat units. Much of the starter box that was leaked is close combat oriented. It's, Primaris Vanguard Marines with shields and Necron, the new Necron 3-leg destroyers, the Sotek destroyers that have the 3 different close combat variants, the 2-handed sword, the 2 one-handed swords, and then the 1 2-handed sword with a second grabby fist. And then, so if we're leaning into more of a close combat game, that could mean that close combat characters in the lore and in the models are going to get a good bump, a good look at. And if you look at good close combat characters, starting because we were talking about the Eldar, that may mean Howling Banshees might get a look. They may mean Striking Scorpions. Howling Banshees being the negative, the Space Marine killers. They're high AP weapons, can't be overwatched, but they're low strength. So Essentially, it's the same. They hit well. Because they're lower strength, they don't wound well. So where they're taking away your save, you're actually going to be making less saves because their strength is so low. But they're also not necessarily good at killing chaff because there's a striking scorpion variant, which is a different class. They're chainswords, so they're strength 4, and they're multiple attacks. So they're better at killing your toughness 3, no armor characters because the chainsword doesn't really have an AP value to it. Than the Howling Banshees, which are better at killing Space Marine or 3-up saved characters. Now, Howling Banshees were originally balanced against regular Space Marines, not against Primera Space Marines, and the 2 wounds a model are real killer against a Howling Banshee. And with no kind of update to that, you don't really see them being brought right now, because the thing that they were supposed to be able to kill, the regular Space Marine, isn't around anymore, and you just don't see that. And those are the 2 kind of close combat units out of the Space Elves. Tau have no close combat units. The Orcs, I think Gazkul Thraka and John, sometimes John's on this show with me, brought up a good point to me a couple days ago. Gazkul's rules, when it came out in the Psychic Awakening books, were written for 9th edition. If you look at his point value on how he's pointed, if you look at some of how his auras work, what his keywords are like, everything points to being ported easily into what they're now discussing as the changes in 9th edition. So I think you'll see more and more of that too. So where it may be beneficial to keep a hands-off approach as we enter 9th edition and be like, I'm not going to get any more of these Psychic Awakening books because I'm just going to hold off until 9th happens. That may not be the best approach, because these Psychic Awakening books are actually being written with 9th edition in mind, and you can glean a lot of lore and rules and information just from these novels that are still coming out in 8th edition. So we'll see a lot of good stuff. There was a lot of great stuff that was talked about during Hobby Time for how the demons came out in their last book, and the knights and the chaos knights and all of that. And there's going to be a couple more of these Psychic Awakening books, if I'm not mistaken, all culminating in a 9th edition release, probably sometime later this year. Probably maybe fall, I'm guessing. If I had to guess, it'll probably get pushed back a little bit, and we'll actually see 9th edition sometime in the fall, similar to when we saw 8th edition drop. Now, some of these changes to how the game operates are interesting. So, like, there's a command phase now. So your CPs are going to be more integral to your game than ever before. You get command points based on the size of the game and the fact that you're battle forged. So if you're battle forged, you're playing a 2,000 point game, it's shown that you're going to get 12 CP. Now, every detachment that you take costs CP now. It's not giving you CP. So you have 12 base. A regular battalion costs 3 CP, which means you don't have 12, you have 9. Now, the way that you can get around that a little bit is that the detachment that your warlord is in many ways refunds the CPs back to you. So if you have a battalion in your 2,000 point army, if you've got 3 of them, you're using 9 of your 12 CP to just create your army. Now, there's no real reason to do that anymore, but if you wanted to take allies, that would be how you take allies, but that costs you CP now. One of those battalions could be free because one of them is going to have your warlord in it, but then you're still using 6 of your 12 CP. Now, you're also, we talked about the command phase a little bit, or mentioned it, each command phase, you're going to get 1 CP back. So not only will you have the amount you start with, which will be dependent on if you take allies, they'll be deducted. If you take multiple detachments in order to min-max things, you'll be using more of your CP up. You'll get 1 CP at the start of each command phase. And, well, it hasn't been said 100% yet, but I think the way that they're doing it and the way that it's worded is that both players receive 1 CP at the beginning of each command phase, which will allow you to, even on the defensive end of turn 1, if you use all of your CP to build your list, so you're starting with 0 and you're going second, when your opponent starts turn 1, you will have 1 CP to use reactionarily for, I don't know, lightning fast reflexes, or I'm not sure if Auspex scan is 1 CP, but if it was, a 1 CP reactionary stratagem. And it will hopefully be more of a slow burn when it comes to stratagems, and less of a, I'm going to make a unkillable Death Star unit that is going to eat up 12 CP in the first turn of the game and run it through other people, like run it down your throat. So those changes are good, and those changes and stratagems and CPs allow more of the lore to leak into the game, because even from a lore standpoint, when you look at the names of these stratagems or what they do, they provide you with more of a look into where they want to go with the story. Oh, thank you, Jester. 2 CP for Auspex scan. It's still great. Even at 2 CP, it's super good, and it gets around so much of what they're talking about now for reinforcements. It's going to be vital, given that the rumor is that, like, turn 2 you could bring people in on the table edge, and turn 3 you can bring people in your opponent's deployment zone. That's just gross. And they're bringing lore into the secondaries, where they're going to have a list of secondaries that will be based around what your army wants to do, and the game is going to be more about who plays their army the way that they want to play their army better than where we kind of grew to in 8th edition of who can alpha strike their opponent off the board faster, or who could stop their opponent from playing the game and having fun. 8th edition, at least from a hyper competitive top echelon stance, has become, if you can stop your opponent from playing the game, you could win the game easier. And I think GW saw that, and GW doesn't want people stopping others from playing the game to be a highlight or a good thing to happen. They don't want that mindset kind of infecting their game, which is good. That's nice, because now, like, turn 3 when you had none, you've gotten a few back to reroll a save or something. Yes, it is nice. And there's rumor that the characters like Guilliman, like Abaddon, like Eldrad, I think for the Eldar, that give you CPs off the bat will actually instead give you an additional 1 CP per turn. And I think there's still going to be there'll be some sort of mechanic to roll to see if you gain more CP, or roll to see if you regain 1, or steal 1, or however people gain 1. But I envision that it's still going to be capped at regaining an additional 1 per turn. So I hope that if Guilliman or Abaddon are giving you 1 per turn, that is of the same pool as regaining 1 through other means. And that means that you're buying that character essentially for a guaranteed 1 CP per turn, and not like a gamble. Kind of like the Exalted Demon rules for Tzeentch allows you on the beginning of your turn on a roll of a 1 or a 6 to gain 1 CP. Which I mean, I have every reason to believe that those rules were written with 9th edition in mind. But you could just think about like what that would mean to the game. So yeah, I'm interested, Laughing Jester, about this Crimson Fist tournament list. Because basically you're saying that they stomped Knights turn 2, which is not unheard of for Crimson Fist, especially since they get the bonuses versus vehicles, they get the bonuses to wound, and they get the bonuses to hit from the Space Marines. So basically you're getting you're hitting on like 2s, rerolling 1s, you're wounding sometimes on 2s, and you're able to put out the weight of fire to take out Knights. Now, where I think that list is going to struggle in 9th edition, I think that list is going to get hit hard, like Eldar lists and like a lot of other lists out there, not just that one in particular, but that list will get hit with the idea that everything is going up by 25%-ish, points-wise. So you're not going to be able to field the weight of fire that you used to be able to field in any army, basically. So even on the Knight side, like, you're not going to see 5 Knights on the table. You may see 3 now as a whole list. But in a Knight army, you don't have 12 CP to begin with for 2,000 points. And if you only had 3 Knights at 2,000 points, and it was balanced point-wise with the guy across from you, it wasn't just the Knights getting hit, and that your opponent had less things, and you had 12 CP to spend amongst those 3 Knights, it would be crazy. Yeah, it's been I'm a little leery to talk about undefeated lists over this time period, because we don't have enough gaming information to make that judgment. So I'm not debating that it was undefeated. Like, it probably is. Yeah, did you see the intercessors, how much they're going to go up? That's a published number now. So intercessors went up from like 14 or 18, whatever they're at now, to 24 points a piece, which is a huge jump, because you're looking at, like, if they were 18, 6 points a model, so 30 points for a 5-man squad. If you're taking 3 squads, that's 90 extra points just for your 3 intercessor squads before weapons. Like, even cultists went up from 4 to 6 points a piece. So that's rough. And then there should be some rebalancing, like, not just that, but like Riptides, I think, should get a look at their points, as well as shield drones and whatever that is, like, whatever. But getting back to that, I think that while that list is undefeated, the fact that no one's really been playing for the last 3 to 4 months definitely helped to contribute the longevity that list was undefeated. Got it. So they were 5 points then. So they went from 5 to 6. Not a huge jump then. So, but then the other change for 9th edition that they came out with is that modifiers will be capped at +1 or -1, which is great for armies that are lower ballistic skill. So ballistic skill 4, ballistic skill 5 armies, knowing that you're always hitting on 6s, always hitting on 5s, it makes your gun lines way more viable. So Imperial Guard gun lines, more viable, especially with the big winners. Tanks are getting a buff. Your tanks can shoot when they're in close combat, or fall back and still shoot. So Imperial Guard tank lines, great. Monsters are going to be able to shoot in close combat. So Tyrannid Carnifexes with 36 Strength 6 -1 shots just run into close combat and still shoot your stuff is doing great. Yeah. Stalker. I'm not saying the list isn't good. Like, the Crimson Fist list is probably great. It's probably like top 3, top 2 lists out there. I'm just saying that because no one's playing right now, it hasn't been challenged in the way that I think it should have been. Like, people probably would have won Adepticon with that list or placed high in Adepticon with that list had it been played, but it hasn't been. No one's tried it. Like, and I don't see, or I mean, it's on me. I haven't done a whole lot of research into that list, but I haven't seen a lot of big tournaments lately, like at all, let alone have ones that have seen it or played that list. And I'm kind of getting to that point of Stalker bolt rifles doing 3 damage. They may, and it hasn't come out yet, it has come out for at least hitting and wounding rolls being capped at 1 for modifiers. They may cap damage at 1, +1 modifier, and -1 modifier. So that Homunculus Coven that halves damage now is just -1. Takes 2 damage to 1 damage. Takes 6 damage to 5 damage instead of 3. And it would make your Stalker bolt rifles 2 damage instead of 3. And while that isn't a huge deal, like 2 damage is still better than 1, obviously. Like, it's twice as good as 1. That's how math works. But like, having it go down and not having your 3 damage guns, it hurts the ability for your lower strength weapons to take out the vehicles as effectively. So, yeah. Oh, so you're saying that you won't find the list out there because no one plays it? So, kind of like reconciling your two statements of the list is undefeated and it's amazing, but you won't find it out there because no one plays it. Is it also undefeated because no one plays it? Like, is it undefeated because no one plays at all and therefore it can't be defeated? Just curious. Just interested in if that is the reason why it's undefeated. But yeah, I think it's also going to be more of a close combat centric game. So that Stalker bolt rifle list, I think, will still do good at shooting, and it will do good at mid-range shooting like bolt rifles do. Like, I think you're right that Stalker bolt rifle is longer range than a normal rifle, right? It's like in the 30s, like 32 range. It's not a 24-inch range rifle like a regular bolt gun, I think. You have to confirm. I don't necessarily play that. Oh, thanks, Nurgle Matt. Just dropped 5 gifted subs in chat. Just showed up and was just like, here you go. Bam. We're the alert's gonna go off for a while, but congratulations to TBD Decisions, AJ Hirsch 13, Dango Greasehammer, Galliant TFFEQ, and Zombie_Eater. You are all subbed to this channel, so thank you. Yeah, a lot of people were real big on the Iron Hands and the Raven Guard, but with the same things that are going to hurt Crimson Fists and hurting everybody else are going to arguably hurt the Iron Hands and the Raven Guard more, because their modifiers, their negative to hit Raven Guard modifiers, are capped at -1. The Iron Hands damage reduction modifiers capped. Maybe I don't know about the damage modifiers yet, but I do know about the to hit and to wound ones. May you always roll 5s. Yeah, no 6s. No one get any 6s. 6s are for overhyped losers. Everyone rolls 5s. That's legit. Matt, what do you think about getting a special set of Team Bad Decision dice where we print our logo on the fives just to piss a bunch of people off? We're never going to do that. Don't don't ever do that. Don't ever print your stuff on fives. That is a bad game remove. Don't do it. But it would be hilarious. But yeah, we're kind of talking about it devolved. We were talking about the lore leading up into ninth edition, and then some of the stuff about ninth edition and how it affects the rules that have come out so far, and how it could affect lore, especially with like touching on they're printing a lot of close combat. They made the board smaller, which makes close combat a lot more viable, given that your objectives have to be 6 inches away from the edge and 12 inches from each other still. Playing on only a 5 foot long board, you've just pushed in those objectives even more. Armies were able, there were few and far between, but some army builds were able to, with that extra foot, still get reliable turn 1 charges for close combat off. And given that it's not like people are like, oh, you took a foot off the edge, and so what? It's a big deal. When you're playing against an all close combat army, you're not playing on the short end of the board. You're playing on the diagonal, trying to get as far away from them as possible. And if someone cuts a foot off your board, they've just pushed you 12 inches closer to your enemy, and that is a turn less of movement that they have to do to get to you. And if they were doing it in 1 turn, maybe 2 turns before, the list of armies that could make turn 1 charges is going to go up substantially. So, what do you think's gonna like happen to combat that? Yeah, you're right. Blood Angels, Raven Guard, both first turn close combats. And with the new models that are coming out, Space Marines will have a viable close combat strategy. Those shields are probably going to give them 3-up invulnerable saves, which are amazing in close combat. A 3-up invul save is so, I mean, it's just like ignore 2/3 of the hits that come at you, period. So they're going to be like stalwart anvils that you just got to deal with. And then those bikes had chain swords, and they were confirmed something like, I don't know 100%, but they were confirmed something like a 14-inch move with a 6-inch advance. And then if they're white scars, you can advance and charge. So you're looking at a 20-inch move before the charge. That no man's land is only 24 inches wide at its most, 18 inches wide in some other forms. So if you're moving 20 inches, that means your threat range on that charge is 32 inches. You're going 6 inches into their deployment zone on turn 1 with those bikes. And then you're thinking like, oh yeah, but what is a biker going to do with the chainsword? They had 4 attacks at strength 4. That's not nothing. Yeah. They're Primaris bikers. They probably have multiple wounds. I don't know what their point value is. They could be essentially pointed into oblivion, which we don't know. So I can't speak to that. But yeah, like, and it's not only, it's going to take some getting used to for people, because it's going to force people that want to play a gun line to have to chaff. So let's just take the Taudar, which is, I'm going to bring 3 Riptides and a bunch of shield drones. If you're reaching out and touching that turn 1, it's done. Yeah, I would say, I would argue that it's at least 3. You're right. The bike's at least 3 wounds, possibly 4. So I could see 3 wounds very easily. I could also see 4 wounds. I could argue 4 wounds, but who knows? It probably be 3. But if you're gonna rush into that, 3 bikes, 9 wounds per se, and then they already said they're making changes to Overwatch. Personally, I think they also said they're making changes to Falling Back, and we saw that they're making changes to Falling Back is that they're adding a stratagem that I don't think will ever get used, personally. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the stratagem that was added to Falling Back for 9th edition, it is 1 or 2 CP, and that when a unit falls back, you could use the stratagem, roll a dice for every model that fell back, and on a 6, that unit takes a mortal wound. This means that 18% of the models that fall back from you can die. It's not that big. I don't see... If you're in combat, say you're a close combat army, you get into combat. If you're a close combat army and you get into combat, you're hopefully going to kill the thing that you're in combat with. And if you don't kill the thing that you're in combat with, it's probably a vehicle or a Titanic thing or something that you couldn't kill in 1 round of combat. And if it is a vehicle or a Titanic thing, that whole stratagem is going to be roll 1 dice on a 6. It deals 1 mortal wound to the thing you do, which is not useful. It's essentially the Catachin traps thing where you roll a dice and then on a 6 it deals a mortal wound, and that never got used. So I don't see that happening. They didn't release the stratagem, if it is a stratagem, for Overwatch, but I would speculate that it is either you pay CP and a single unit cannot fire Overwatch, which would be very powerful. It'd probably be 2 or 3 CP. Or it would be that a blanket rule change of a unit can only fire Overwatch once per turn. So you still can choose, if you're going to get charged by potentially 3 units, you can choose to not fire Overwatch against the first one, hoping that they don't make the charge. And then you have the option to fire Overwatch at the next one or the next one. But if they do make the charge, that's the gamble. If they make the charge, you can't fire Overwatch, you're now in combat. That could also possibly be the change. We don't know yet, but it seems to be the way that they're going in close combat. Now, like we mentioned, to combat that, you're going to need to bring chaff. Now, chaff is often the cheaper units in your codex, which are often the troop choices. This is rough because this balances hand in hand with the changes that they're making to CPs. Your detachments are going to cost you CPs, other than the one that you put your warlord in, which will refund some or all of its command points. If you're taking additional detachments to bring additional troop choices, it's going to cost you. If you're going to bring additional detachments to bring alliances, or Nurgle Matt, if you wanted both demons and Death Guard now, it's going to cost you command points out of the bat. You're going to get 12 for a 2,000 point game. You're going to have to pay 3 CP for a battalion of Nurgle demons, and you're going to have to pay 3 CP for a battalion of Death Guard. And then you'll pay 3 or some number of CP. We know the battalion's 3. That's been leaked already, but you'll pay some number of CP for the heavy detachment with your knights in it. So that out of your 12, you're going to be spending a lot to begin the game. Whereas an army that stays pure, if for Nurgle Matt, if you were going to play just Death Guard, you bring Morty with your Death Guard, you don't have to pay at all for that detachment, because your warlord will refund your detachment cost, which I think is brilliant. And that by not taking allies, you'll have more stratagems to use. I think that putting things in reserve costs you CP, buying relics, buying warlord traits all cost you CP in the beginning of the game, and now building your list costs you more CP in the beginning of the game. So even a lot of well-crafted lists probably are only starting with, I don't know, 4 to 6 CP to begin the game, and then you're getting one at the beginning of each player turn. At least that's how it's. That may need to be FAQ'd, but that's how what has been leaked reads to me. Is that both players muster 1 CP at the beginning of each command phase. So you're looking at each game turn, you're going to generate 2, and if you go first, you get your first one, and if you go second and you don't use your first one from your opponent's turn, you actually have 2 to spend on your turn, which helps balance a little more towards the shootiness of turn 1 armies. But it's going to be interesting. I think if you had to pick Brandon's brain on 9th edition, what's going to happen, I think you're going to see a deviation into 3 types of lists. You're going to see the gunline list, you're going to see the horde spam melee list, and then you're going to see the elite board control list. And that elite board control list is either going to be use that psychically, like Grey Knights, T-Suns, Tzeentch, or some Imperial elite shooty stuff, or Imperial elite close combat stuff. The hordes are going to be your Tyranids, your orcs, basically board control lists. I can put out enough gaunt bodies or enough orc boy bodies that I'm going to eat up the whole board, and you're not going to be able to do anything. And even if you do bring shooting, you're never going to have enough to shoot the whole board off by this time. And those lists will do well on tournaments and games that they don't play with clocks. And the gunline list, which is going to have a hard time with the board control lists because it's going to need better target priority for that, and it's going to have a hard time versus the horde list because it's going to need to be able to shoot enough and yet have enough chaff. It's going to need enough chaff to stop the close combat list from getting to it too fast, and it's going to need to have enough shooting to kill the close combat list down before it gets to it. And the more chaff you have, the less shooting you have. The more shooty you have, the less chaff you have. So there's going to be a good balance there. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to rewrite every codex. They did say that every codex moving in from 8th to 9th edition is going to port over directly. So there'll be no indexes. Your codex will play, your stratagems will play from 8th edition into 9th edition perfectly fine. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be perfectly balanced. The indexes were not perfectly balanced. They were playable, which is what I think that they're going to do with the codexes. And then they will release a new set of codexes for everybody. I hope that they don't completely rewrite everybody, because I think that there's some people that are in a good spot right now. I think Space Marines are in a good spot right now. I don't think they need a complete rewrite of their rules. Even Aeldari, they took a couple hits, and I think that they have a couple stratagems that are made kind of useless due to the changes in the rules. So if they evaluated those stratagems, maybe reworded them a little bit or repriced them to evaluate what's going on, I think that could help. But all in all, I think Space Elves are in a good spot. Orcs are in a better spot than they've ever been. 7th and 6th and 5th edition were not kind to them. They've been a long time coming, and I think they're in a good spot now. Necrons, I think, will be in a good spot for a while, but it's the curse of the first codex. Like, Space Marines will get updates. They'll be made better. It'll be good for Space Marines for a while, but Necrons will probably get touched at the beginning of 9th edition and never see another update all of 9th edition. So even if they're real good, everything else will be brought up to their level, and I think they'll do the same thing that Death Guard had in 8th and like Orcs had in 7th. They were an early codex and they got overtaken fast. So that kind of is that. So well, we've rambled for about an hour and 40 minutes now on started out with an Adepticon boxing. Oh, actually, Space Marine Codex be first, but they'll have to add because new rules, new models. I don't see them doing a data sheets for them. So did you actually know, Laughing Jester, that they are coming out with the app? So they're going to do an app like Age of Sigmar does, and all of the updated rules changes, points changes, codexes, everything will be at your fingertips, digital, available with the app. So Matt just dropped another sub bomb of 10 new gifted tier 1 subs. So thank you, Matt. That's puts you up to 15 on the day, I think. Exiled King 369, Dan the Man 123. You guys are awesome. Ally _ Boyd. Shops closed. ALEWY 1403. Deucener, Soltaris 1, RSLC 332, and I Am Lurkster all are now tier 1 subs. Welcome to the family, guys. So you're all one of us now. And we get to hear that like ping go off for the next couple seconds as Nurgle Matt has gifted 15 subs on the day. But we're kind of winding down a little bit. We talked earlier today with Adepticon. We had an unboxing for the stuff that came out of the Adepticon crate. So watch it in the VOD or watch it us on YouTube if you would like to see that kind of information and stuff on that. We talked about some Aeldari, Drukhari, Ynnari lore and took that from the beginning all the way through 9th edition and talked about a little bit of 9th edition. Oh, thank you. The ping is now our outro music. But took that into 9th edition and discussed what it was like and what we can see from the lore coming into 9th edition. So if you'd like to watch any of our other content, you can see all our VODs here on Twitch or on YouTube under the Team Bad Decisions YouTube page. If you wanted to watch a bunch of them in order on a playlist. We also, you can see our content and information on us on teambaddecisions.com, our personal website, as well as a merch store if you're looking in to get any Team Bad Decision merch. I'm Brandon Burns. I am here with Team Bad Decisions, and we are currently ending up a Lore Linguist show. That's our show every Friday from 4:30 to about 6 o'clock, 6:30, depending on if we get into talks or not. Our biggest show, Hobby Time, is tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. That's going to have a lot of topics that pertain to miniature wargaming, the whole spectrum, not just lore. And then Competitive Corner is our Monday show, also 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. And we talk about all things competitive 40K and Age of Sigmar and Games Workshop, mini wargaming, stuff like that. Competitive, talk about points, boards, just nice lean into the actual tactics and competitive side of the gaming. So just if you are catching us at the tail end of this, feel free to start it over, or I'll be throwing up some reruns. And I hope you have a great day, guys. Stay safe, and let's make some bad decisions.